Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our
Morning.
last office hour for school year 22-23. We appreciate you folks joining us. We can't imagine how busy you are from day to day trying to finalize. I believe the count is 14 school days in my home district. So I'm sure those 14 days are going to be chock full with some learning and some great activities to engage students. And we appreciate you taking some time out of your very busy schedule to join us for our Office of Federal Emergency Relief Programs last office hour of this school year. We'll go through introductions like we do every month. My name is Shelley Shassy-Jandro. I am the Director of the Office of Federal Emergency Relief Programs. Our colleague Monique Sullivan is the ARP coordinator who is unable to attend today.
I'm Karen Kuziak. I coordinated CARES and continue to coordinate CARISA or ESSER 2 and get involved with some of the other special projects and special tests that are involved with ARP.
And I'm Kevin Harrington, and I'm the Gear and EANS coordinator.
Maisha, I have not seen yet this morning here, but she's our fiscal coordinator.
And I'm Deanna Roberge. I am one of the management analysts and I do invoicing.
I'm Terry Beal, and like Dee Dee, I'm a management analyst and I review invoices.
Hi, I'm Natalie Owens, and I'm the newest member of the team, and I'm a procurement analyst.
So today's topics are going to include CARISA, ESSER 2 closeouts, UEIs, reminders about special provisions of ARP, intensified reporting expectations for FY23, maintenance of GEM, and Q&As. Today's objective, participants will be able to use ESSER funds effectively and in alignment with federal requirements. CARISA funds, ESSER funds are available for obligation by SAUs through September 30th, 2023, which includes the tiding periods. Any funds not invoiced by 12/30/23 will no longer be accessible. CARISA spending facts that we have as of now, 52 SAUs have 30 plus of their CARISA ESSER 2 remaining to invoice. Only 122 calendar days left to obligate CARISA ESSER 2 funds, and approximately 210 days left to fully invoice CARISA ESSER 2.
On April 4th, 2022, the unique entity identifier used across the federal government changed from the DUNS number to unique entity ID generated by SAM.gov. The unique identity ID, entity ID, UEI, is a 12-character alphanumeric ID assigned to an entity by SAM.gov. As part of this transition, the DUNS number has been removed from SAM.gov. Entity registration, searching, and data entry in SAM.gov now require use of the new unique entity ID. The UEI number will never expire. However, entity registrations do expire annually and require annual renewal. Please ensure that your organization renews its registration prior to the expiration date. The expiration date is listed in your entity record in SAM.gov. For the fiscal year 2023 performance report, UEIs will be needed for each school within the district, not just the district at the district level.
So one of the reasons why we wanted to highlight this component of the UEI numbers is we know that we've been working through about a year of collecting at the SEA level, the state entity level. We also have been working with our schools, our districts in particular, when we have a discrepancy between our records and the records that may have been submitted in our ESSER performance report. And we know, as Terry mentioned, for FY23 in the U.S. Department of Education's performance report, they are going to ask for UEIs for every school within the district. And we'll highlight some of those reporting requirements for FY23 that we know of as of today, because we are now 11 months into FY23, and we want to be sure that you folks have some mechanisms in place to be able to accurately report on FY23 when that time comes about that the U.S. Department of Education has requested that information. So that sort of starts our next series and next group of slides for where we are in this work related to ESSER. So we know that in the performance report, the one that was due April 7th, we asked for any updates on your safe return to instruction plan, as well as your use of funds plan. Those two plans in particular, as indicated in statute, are required to be reviewed and revised, if applicable, every 6 months. So we wanted to highlight the component of being sure that there's a date in which you've identified in those plans. And I completely understand that we are in a very different place today, June 1st, 2023, than we were when ARP came about in April of 2021. However, based on statutory requirements, the safe return to instruction plan must be reviewed and revised, if applicable, throughout the duration of ARP funding. So you may think to yourself, well, goodness gracious, we don't have a mask policy currently. So your safe return to instruction plan may indicate that on such and such a date, this plan was reviewed, and at that time, based on CDC guidelines and our conversations with our stakeholders, we no longer have a mask policy. Or the mask policy may be if you've tested positive for COVID, the first 5 days is quarantining, the second 5 days of a 10-day span is to, you can participate in activities with a mask or suggested of a mask. Those are the types of revisions that should be included in this plan and publicly available on your website through the duration of the ARP funding. The snapshots that we have on this screen, the left side is right off of our Office of Federal Emergency Relief page. The right-hand side is from the U.S. Department of Ed's Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. So on our website, you can see that we have a tile on the right-hand side that's devoted only to the spending and instruction plans. And we highlight those requirements as well as the links to all of our SAU plans in the state. So when you are asked for the link in the performance report or in the application, we are utilizing that information directly on that website that is linked from our homepage of the Office of Federal Emergency Relief. That has been a request of the U.S. Department of Ed, so that is how we've met that criteria. On the second side of the screen, the right-hand side, as I mentioned, that is directly from the U.S. Department of Ed. It is a screenshot. I only took a screenshot of the first, the narrative as well as the column headers, because you can see that all 50 states, 52 states, because we have two territories that we also include, have a link. There's a link for the use of funds, and there's a link for in-person instruction plans. And if you scroll down to Maine, you will see that both of those links link right back to the page on the left-hand side that is on the Office of Federal Emergency Relief. The link at the bottom of our page where it says SAU use of funds and safe return to instruction plans is an Excel spreadsheet that is downloaded and is updated every time we request that information from our SAUs. So you may say, well, why are they asking for my two plans again in the performance report? I have it in the application. We essentially take every opportunity to get updated information. And please remember that those plans should be easily accessible on your website and always up to date. So if you've made a revision to your application, that revision should be present on your publicly available use of funds plan off of your website. Then we're going to jump into some components of what we have learned from the U.S. Department of Ed is going to be in the FY23's performance report. So we highlighted the UEIs, and the main reason in which we are going to need school level UEIs is because one of the questions in FY23's performance report is going to be related to the school and the staff type for FTEs. In FY22, you reported FTEs across the district, and now the U.S. Department of Ed is asking for each school and the staff type with FTEs. So the screenshot at the bottom of this slide is directly copied and pasted from a publicly available document that is related to all of the U.S. Department of Ed's performance reports. And I can pop that link to the U.S. Department of Ed's performance reports in the chat box in a moment when we transition to another staff member. Again, highlighting some components of what FY23's performance report is going to have that FY22's performance report did not have. So again, a copy and paste directly from that publicly available U.S. Department of Ed performance report, and preview questions is essentially what they call these components. A preview question is 3D1 through 3D3. You will notice that those questions we needed to report on your behalf, which we asked. You may have noticed there was a checkbox, identify which evidence-based intervention you utilize. And then the question related to how were these activities selected for your disproportionately impacted youth or your underserved student groups. And that narrative was part of our performance report for FY22. It was a component that we took and copied and pasted, but we know that the U.S. Department of Ed may generate that in a very different fashion based on this year's preview question, because the narratives had a character limit, but essentially that was a lot of language that they need to weed through to determine how were those activities selected. So you folks, we're encouraging you folks to start thinking about how was the intentionality of selecting this activity for this student group, and how do I describe that intentionality in one or two, maybe a short sentence. Again, another preview question. I know that we asked some questions related to the evidence-based interventions and how much was spent in learning loss in FY22's performance report. In FY23's performance report, the U.S. Department of Ed has asked us to break it down even more and break it down by eligible population and student groups in which we're served. So you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, again, a copy and paste directly from the publicly available U.S. Department of Ed's performance report. It is asking student groups, but it is also asking how many kiddos would have been in that student group and how many kiddos were served, and making that correlation between, I can clearly articulate that I may have had a student group of 700 students or 150 students, and of that 150 students, I can say with documentation that 68 of them participated in, I'll use the example that's on the screen, in summer learning or summer enrichment programs. Again, we wanted to share this information, not to overwhelm you, but to be able to highlight some of the things that you will see in FY23's performance report while we're in that fiscal year. We have a question related to student enrollment by subgroups. So this one will ask based on the student group that's identified on the right-hand screen, on the right-hand side of the slide, student counts. And again, this should just correlate to other data sources. So it talks about the enrollment data in EdFacts. So just being sure that that data connects to EdFacts, which essentially we utilize NEO data to report EdFact reports on your behalf as well. This screen the activity categories may look familiar: addressing physical health and safety, meeting student needs, mental health supports, and operational expenses. Those were 4 categories that were utilized in FY22's performance report. And in FY22's, there was some categories within it. However, they were more related to budgetary categories like salaries, supplies, equipment. And we can see that in FY23, the ways in which the activities are reported are very different. They're reported in more refined mechanism under that activity. So I will use operational expenses as an example. So when we say we're spending $1,400 in operation, what areas did that operation fund support?
So Dawn McLaughlin has a question, and the question is, will this be for both Carissa and ARP? It will be for all of the ESSER funds. You need to report on all 3 of the funds, particularly if you're using any of them in 2023.
And that's a great question, Dawn, and a wonderful clarification from Karen. When these questions are posed, they're posed related to ESSER funds, which includes CARE, Carissa, and ARP. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I don't know about CARES, I was already done. However, CARES had 3 months of potential expenditures from July 1st of 22 through September 30th of 22 that would be reported in FY23's performance report.
And there definitely are a few districts in Maine who are in that situation. That's why I was certain to say CARES.
Thank you, Karen.
So we're heading up to this crescendo in reporting, as Shelley just gave you the preview of. So that's going to be very intense next year. And then at the same time, there are things to think about as these funds end and you file your final report and your final invoices. You think you can wash your hands of this. There's more. So I attended a workshop about all kinds of things related to compliance with federal funds. And one piece of information I'm going to just share with you today, and I'll do some more as our meetings continue into next year, is about the retention of records requirement. So all the financial records, the supporting documents about how you use these funds, any statistics you kept, like, you know, how students did by group that Shelley was just talking about, all of those must be retained related to the award or to the grant. And this is, again, all 3 grants for a period of 3 years from the date of submission of the final expenditure report. All right, so you file your last report, we say it's good, we all agree. You need to hold on to those records for 3 years, unless, and I'm just citing some of the exceptions. You can read more about it if you click that part of the document, CFR2 part 200.334. So if you're in a situation, and we hope you're not, but you might be in a situation where there is litigation or claims or an audit that was started before the end of that expiration period or before the 3 years, if something happened, you know, questions came up, the records must continue to be retained until all of that litigation, the claims, or an audit finding are resolved and a final action has been taken. And then who knows, B is when notified to extend the retention period. There might be a situation where you are asked, or the federal government asks us, or you ask to someone asked to have it retained. So I just lost the slides. Okay. And I can't remember what C was without seeing the slide in front of me.
Just a minute, I was trying to get the link to the publicly available sheet, and I messed up my screen share. So give me just 1 second,
Sure.
Karen. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Multitasking, I guess, did not work this morning. Let's see. And here we are.
And I could have navigated to it on my desktop, but I thought I would have lost my place. Oh, yes. This is related to disposition. So I'll read what it says, and then I'll give you an example. Records for real property and equipment acquired with federal funds must be retained for 3 years after the final disposition. So let's say you obtained a van with ESSER funds during the period of obligation and liquidation. So you got that. And then you retain records for 3 years, right? But then on the 4th year, you decide that you're going to trade in that van or sell that van or whatever. You've used it now for about 7 years. It's time. You must retain funds for that final disposition for 3 years after you've sold the van or disposed of the van. So, you know, all of the, and this sort of reminds you that all of the equipment that you've purchased or the real property that you've purchased, you must keep a log of that is reviewed annually of items that you've purchased, you know, substantial items that rise to the level of being identified as equipment that you purchased with federal funds. You must maintain a log of those purchases.
So I can take this one. We wanted to be sure that potentially with any transitions that are happening over the summer, that both the federal grant reimbursement system, which we refer to as FGRS, as well as the applications are updated. So if there should be a change in leadership, whether that be at the superintendent, the business office, or within the application coordinator, it is very important to go back to GEMS and update it on all 3 applications, as well as the federal grant reimbursement system. And we have some step-by-step instructions to be able to do those changes. And the reason why this information is extremely important and needs to be updated is because if we are getting a request to have an application reopened, or we are working with a district about matters associated with ESSER funding, we are only going to work with and or reopen based on a request of these folks who are listed: the superintendent, the applicant coordinator, and or the business manager. And the reason why this is important is because it's an internal control to be sure that the funds are meeting the needs of that were identified in the stakeholder consultation, but also a separation of duties, which is really important. The other component that is extremely valuable with the information that is within the federal grant reimbursement system and the applications, both the superintendent and the applicant coordinator, is when we send out any information directly from GEMS, it goes to the superintendent and to the applicant coordinator. We do not currently have a mechanism in which it goes directly to the business managers. However, we do utilize a listserv internally from our colleagues within school finance to try to get that information out to our business managers as well. But if you are not listed in one of these locations, it is very unlikely you're getting any of the information we're sending out via GEMS, which is why this is critical. And then, of course, we want to wish you a wonderful summer. We will take a moment to respond to any questions that you may have, and we appreciate you folks joining us.
Hi,
Hi, Shelley, this is Cynthia. Let me get my face on there. Let's see. I just had a question about ESSER 3, the ARP. So I'm assuming that it will be just like ESSER 2 is for this year. It'll be just a 1 year forward. So June 30th, September 30th. Deadlines for ARP. So my question is, summer school for next year, if we're planning to do summer school for next year, this funding, the funds won't be all spent until July and August. Is that acceptable for next year, the summer of 24?
So summer of 24, July 24, August 24
Mhm.
is still within the period of obligation for ARP. So you
Okay.
would not be utilizing Carissa ESSER 2 funding, but you
Right.
potentially could be utilizing ARP ESSER 3 funding, and that would
Right.
be accurate.
Yes, I think I ask you every year, but I just want to verify it every time. Thank you.
Shelley, I was wondering if I could ask a question.
Of course.
So at one point in time in one of these meetings in the past 3 years, and I may have dreamed this, I don't remember. When Karen was talking, about, disposing of property or selling property, at one point in time, did we talk about, property like laptops, for example, that were purchased with federal money? And if we sell those, does a portion of that money need to go back to the federal government? How does that all work? Is the money ours? Because it's really not ours. It's right. So.
That's
there
a great
guidelines?
question.
Okay.
So I know that we have had some information in past office hours about disposition. And there's a lot of numbers to keep in mind, and the numbers seem to be very similar. So I'm going to start with when we identify equipment, we use a $5,000 threshold. Equipment, if an item like a van, I'll use the example that Karen used earlier, a van, that is going to be over $5,000. So that's an equipment. The disposition of equipment is different than the disposition of supplies. So if I jump back to your example, Dawn, with the laptops themselves were under $5,000. So they're identified as supplies. So we think about the disposition of supplies in a very, like I said, in a very different way than we think about disposition of equipment. So when you are looking at the disposition of something that has been identified as a supply, you have the $5,000 number as well. However, that $5,000 over or under is related to the aggregate unused supply total. So if you were putting 100 laptops together that were unused and no longer being utilized for the purpose in which they were purchased, and they no longer have a use in another federal funded program, then what happens is you have to determine the fair market value for those collection of like supplies. So in this case, if you bought 100 MacBooks, that 100 MacBooks, if that is less than $5,000, essentially an SAU can retain, sell, or dispose of with, I'm going to use these terms very lightly, with not a whole lot of requirements.
Yeah.
However, you still need to be sure that if you've sold them, you maintain the documentation. So you maintain the documentation related to, I had 100, this is how I got my fair market value, this is the day I sold them, this is how much was made on it, and this is what the money then purchased. And keeping those records, as Karen alluded to in one of the slides, for our next number of years. And we're going to say 3, but it's not 3 from the day it's sold. So just kind of keeping that all in mind. The other component is if it is above $5,000, so let's say you have 10,000 laptops and collectively together, those 10,000 laptops equate to above $5,000, even though they're supplies. You must reach out to the funding entity to ourselves, who then will reach out to the US Department of Ed. When it
Okay.
comes to equipment, it's still that $5,000 limit, but essentially it's identifying the fair market value now versus what you purchased that equipment for. So we know, anybody who's bought a new vehicle lately, you can see that you may have paid 10,000 more than it is just with a few hundred miles on it. So identifying that fair market value is really important when it comes to both entities, but for supplies, it's the supply, the unused supply altogether. And for equipment, it's that one item per unit.
Okay, thank you. Nobody likes surprises, right? And also, I'm just thinking about, audits and cash on hand and selling something and having some cash on hand, which is bad. And so just thinking about all of those things, I just want it to be straight in my mind, I guess, going forward. So thank you.
And I think one key thing is just be sure that you're reaching out to our team.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about those components at the local level. We meet with our US program officer every month, and these are the types of questions that we take to our US program officer.
Hi, Shelley, can I ask a question?
Good morning, Kate.
Hello. So you just mentioned updating the contact page. And I know that when we've made other changes in the applications, you want us to write an as of date. So we'll have a new superintendent soon and a new business manager. And so I'm wondering, I know, do you want me to just update the page in all 3 applications, period? Or is there an as of date so that when you do a look back, you know who is responsible for that decision making? Does that make sense?
So unfortunately, the application setup page in both entities does not allow to have a date. So you're going to want to be sure to update your superintendent information so that they're getting the latest and greatest, whether that be a newsletter or an email notification about a performance report. So making sure that you update the application setup page to reflect the new superintendent will be important. However, the new superintendent, even with a reopened application, will never need to recertify the entire application. So it will always hold the date in which the previous superintendent had certified the application. So if we're using ARP as an example, if at one point the very first submission of ARP was September 27 of 21, that date and that superintendent will be listed.
Okay. Just to clarify that date, so the new superintendent will be listed as of that original certification date of 2021.
It will maintain the previous superintendent's name and that date. It will never, that name will never be replaced.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep. There was a question in the chat box that I just caught my eye. So when will the next performance report be due? That's a great question. Anybody who's been in this role for a few years related to emergency relief knows that we as a team try to get out that performance report as quickly as possible. In 2021, we got it out in December and it was due in March. And unfortunately, that was not the best situation because between December and March, the US Department of Ed changed our due date 3 times and also went to public comment 3 times, which revised what was being requested of the SEA on the SAU's behalf. So we had to essentially work with districts to obtain information in a different manner than the performance report if we had any follow-up questions. In FY22's circumstance, we waited until the US Department of Ed said, this is what the performance report for SEA's state agencies is going to look like. And these are the questions we're going to ask. They released that on a Friday, the very last Friday in February, and said, by the way, it's due May 4th. So what we did was we as a team took an opportunity to create a template and provided that template to all of our SAUs while we were building it in GEMS so that you could start collecting the information. However, that created a very short timeline for our SAUs. So we play with this concept of, is it more beneficial to have information from the SAUs that can directly be reported to the US Department of Ed, or have a very extremely short timeline for our SAUs? And as you can imagine, we want to be sure that we're reporting on your behalf to the best of our ability. And we feel that even though it's taxing and complex on the SAU level, that we want to be sure that we are not compromising any of these funds and we're not misreporting the use of any of these funds. So unfortunately, we feel that the latter, the timeline, the crunch timeline, is in everyone's best interest, both the SAUs and the SEAs. And we do not know when FY23's performance report is going to be due for the US Department of Ed. We are extremely appreciative that when they put out FY22's, they put out all these wonderful, great preview questions. So we're hopeful that it will stay consistent and it will look, FY23's performance report will look very similar with those enhancements and those additional questions. But hopefully we have a good snapshot of what it looks like, so that even if it is a tight timeline, we know that you folks have the information and that likely will be simpler than maybe FY21 or FY22's performance report was.